Hello, everyone. My name is Alistair Ballantyne, and you are listening to The Big Soup. Today, we are talking about home and hope in an uncertain world. Now, for many of us, home is not a place, it is not a town, a city, it's not a specific house, it's not necessarily a set group of people. Home is a feeling. Home is an energy. Home is a vibration. Home is a frequency. Home is a sense of self. And without that sense of home within ourselves, it can be hard to connect with a sense of hope as the world seems to be getting stranger and the regressive influences seek to clamp down even further to drag us back to an imaginary version of the past that never existed outside of propaganda. Now, let's start with what is home to me. A lot of the conceptualization of home for me for many years was driven by a sense of loss, a sense of pain, a sense of alienation, and a sense that home would be something that I never had. This is down to many different factors, and the big ones that I can point to right now that would be relational for others is, first of all, getting kicked out of home at quite a young age, and then building up to that, family conflict, discord, sense of alienation, and being pushed. So, my two main reasons for this for many years and how I looked at it was, number one, my sense of alienation from family, sense of disconnection from family, and that relationship deteriorating as I went from childhood into adolescence. So, as I was starting to kind of find my own concepts in the world and my own way of relating to things and connecting with things, just when you kind of need the support of your family the most, that started to ebb away. And then coming into the adult world essentially backwards and having to figure out things as I went along, that sense of home was something that felt more abstract and difficult and just unrecognizable to me as time passed, because the further away I got from it, the more disconnected I felt from that sense of the people who were supposed to protect me, the people who were supposed to guide me, to help me evolve and grow into a human being. There was just a weird, I don't even know how to describe it, not like a disconnection, because my desire was always to reconnect, to repair, and to rebuild, and all of these things. But the more time that passed, the more that just didn't seem possible. The second one is being of a mixed racial background. My dad is Scottish. I was born in Scotland. My mum came over from Iran in the late 70s. So there was a sense of cultural disconnection, because you're not fully this, you're not fully that. But ultimately, as a citizen of the world and not a regressive shithead, I have always self identified as British, because to me, Britain in the modern age is about pulling together on that diversity and strength of post colonial multiculturalism, which some people seem to have a problem with. Now, being mixed race is a funny thing, because mixed race people just get each other. Anytime I've come across a mixed race person, doesn't matter what the vibe is, what their mixture is, shall we say, there is an experience of being mixed race where you basically live life in a liminal space. You live it in an in between. You have the different pillars of your own identity, but it's up to you to reconcile them and forge something of your own. I was born in Scotland. I lived most of my life in England. I consider myself British. However, my dad is Scottish and my mum is from Iran. So for me, there was a sense of, for many years, to fit in and be accepted, I leaned into the Scottish side hard, like 100% where possible. And the sense of connection with the Persian Iranian side was difficult, because my family is one of the many families that left the country before the revolution, so they had a sense of disconnection with what Iran is now, and more identified with that sense of Persia in the past. So trying to have a concept of what that was something that I had to forge for myself, because they didn't want to talk about it because it was painful for them. And I totally understand that now as an adult. And in recent years, conversations have actually started to happen, which is really cool. But as a kid, it seemed like this very far away place that I couldn't go to. I didn't understand, even though it was part of my cultural heritage. And I wanted to be curious about that, just to understand the background of my family. And one of the difficulties of the mixed race experience is when you're kind of ethnically ambiguous, which is the case for me, people are always like, oh, where are you from? And all this kind of thing. And it's always one of those questions that anyone from a minority background or mixed background is going to go, yeah, where are we going with this? We've heard this one before, because essentially it's shorthand for why do you look different? And, that's a very human question. And sometimes people will meet that with a curiosity, they'll be open to it. Other times they'll meet it with a very regressive small mind because they have their brain in their ass. So, it's a minefield with that kind of thing. But ultimately, the sense of alienation from the familial home. And also, there is actually a third part to that as well, which is an interesting one, because the town that I grew up in is also the town that I live in presently. And when I grew up here, I felt completely like a fish out of water. I didn't fit in. It's some amazing friends, but the overall vibe of the place was just really hard for me to connect with, because it was so removed from what I understood to be the environments that I wanted to be in. Because even though we moved down to England when I was really young, I think 3 at the time, I still had this awareness of being from a family that was from a city or somewhere bigger or somewhere a bit more cosmopolitan, and then coming to a small country town which is not very diverse. That's okay, it's not a problem. But growing up in that environment, you really had to have a strong sense of character if you were going to be yourself, rather than just kind of shaving off any edges to try and fit in. But, when does that ever really change? But the interesting thing about this now is, coming back here as, the years have rolled on, I now feel a lot happier here, not in that it's somewhere I want to stay for the rest of my life, but I recognize having that broader awareness and experience and contact with the world has allowed me to have this sense of, this is a nice bolt hole for me that I can return to, and I can be myself. And the friends that I have here don't know me for the work that I do. They know me as the kid from school, or they know me as, the person that they grew up with, rather than someone that is into all of the spirituality stuff or the music stuff or the teaching stuff. So that's nice, because it means that when I'm here, I can just be myself. So that's a really nice thing that actually came out of a negative thing, in terms of that feeling of being alienated from the family home and having to leave early. That became a positive thing, because it meant that from the age of 17 onwards, I had to figure out how to make it by myself. And of course, there is no such thing as a self-made human being. I have had some help and support along the way in different aspects, but a lot of that help and support has been in terms of like the emotional, the spiritual, conversational, not necessarily the material, but the other softer connective aspects of life. So I'm very grateful for that. And from there, by the time I was, in my mid to late 20s, I felt that I'd lived a life about 3 times as long than I already had done. So it set me up well for this work, and having touch points with different people, community backgrounds and ideas and ideologies, and actually having a kind of an informed perspective rather than just things that I've read in theory. It's, really kind of learning as you go. And then in terms of the actual sort of the mixed race stuff, for me, that allowed me to move through all different kinds of communities with a sense of acceptance and solidarity with everyone, which was beautiful. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. And I think one of the antidotes to the division in our society that the populists are so focused on expanding is to connect with more communities and different cultures and understand that ultimately we are actually all just the same. It's the stories that make us different, it's the perspectives that make us different, and we can draw strength in those differences. But for me, these three things were key components in coming home to myself. So that sense of having to fly the family nest, but then coming back and developing relationships with the family as an adult, acceptance of my own identity, because it wasn't a case of having to repress one at the sake of the other. It was about bridging both. So bringing all of that together, these three components that, I'm talking at like 40 years old here, reconciling them, bringing them together, I've never felt more comfortable and confident in my own skin in my life, which is great. I mean, I wish that for everyone, but there are plenty of people out there who are threatened by the blossoming diversity of the human ecosystem. They're going to have a hard time in the world as it grows. But for us who are here to be at the leading edge of creating the future that is ready to that is the foundations of an interplanetary civilization, it's the way I see it. It's important for us to feel that sense of home within ourselves, because we tread a path that is more unorthodox, seemingly unsafe, or as some may say, the road less traveled. And of course, all of this was a personal story of transformation as well, because that pain I felt at, being ejected from the safety of the family also came under the shadow of quite prolonged psychological abuse at the hands of a step parent that was intentional to push me out. So there was a sense of rage, there was a sense of frustration, there was an inescapable lingering sense of pain that I had to do something about that. And that was, the experience of my 20s and that disconnection, and then trying to come back home to myself. The reconciliation of the mixed race identity was then another big thing. And that was something that I really kind of leaned into once I was out on my own in the adult world, and moving into a bigger place and having contact with different cultural communities and groups. That really helped. But something else that really helped was my childhood love of Star Trek, something that has stayed with me throughout my life, and I'm not ashamed to admit that. And it was the character of Spock, the half human, half Vulcan, who at times was shown to wrestle with the dual nature and the polarities of his being. And essentially, he was presenting as Vulcan. And the Vulcans are known to be logical. They have deep, powerful emotions, but they keep them suppressed. And logic is always the answer for everything. But, of course, humans, we are defined by our emotions, aren't we? It's a very key component of the human experience. So watching that play out and seeing that character kind of come to peace and acceptance of themselves showed me that there was a way. And I have always been someone who's believed in a brighter future for humanity, which is, even now, I think that ultimately in the bigger picture of things, we are going in the right direction, but that doesn't justify any of the heinous, horrific stuff that is going on in our world right now, as the old ways try to keep themselves established, and also the justifications for using religion as a tool of murder in 2025 is not something that I think any of us should be given the time of day. But so, even with all of this very present stuff and all the things to do with the climate, the geopolitical instability, and the blue pill that is populism and nationalism, we can take all of that and see that progress is happening. There is hope, there is movement, there is a sense of looking above all of this, coming from different groups of people and perspectives coming together. Again, there's a diversity in that. It's the monocultural stuff that seems to be struggling. So having that reconciliation of the self-identity was really important as well. And then the third thing, I remember for many years, I wouldn't have moved back here if you paid me. And that was my own personal stuff. And it's not to do with the place, the people, it was my own feelings. And there came a point where, looking for somewhere to live with my ex-partner, we were struggling to get somewhere back in London because rents had shot up, but also we had a dodgy landlord. So we got into a dispute with them, and as a result didn't have a reference. So it was really difficult for us to get a place to live. So we agreed, after about 8-9 months of living separately, that we would just get the first place that we could, which happened to be a place here. So I thought to myself, this will be a good opportunity to come back, and instead of seeing it as a town that is full of ghosts, seeing it as a town that on every street corner there is a memory, and shifting that perspective from something that was very debilitating to something that's actually quite beautiful and a source of comfort in many ways. Now, that really sets the scene for that sense of home as a feeling, you know. And to me, home is the feeling of acceptance. Home is the calm nervous system, because when I was growing up, my nervous system was not calm at home. It was not at all. So that feeling of being able to relax into myself and just be at peace is something that I look for. When I feel that in other people, I know that I'm around the right people. If I feel on edge, or if I'm second guessing myself, or I'm having to kind of tone down my self-expression for the sake of others' convenience, then I know I'm around the wrong people. Because this idea of the social hierarchy and the margins of acceptability, again, we have touched on this a few times now on the journey so far, and we will continue to do so, because I would like for our listeners who are with us all the way along to see that there are connected themes in what might seem like a very random podcast, because this everything is intentional. So I spent a lot of my time searching for that feeling of home, searching for that feeling of acceptance, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. But you don't learn these things if you don't try. One of the difficult things that I did come to an awareness of was, with all this sense of loss and coming into the adult world in that way, that attracted me to completely the wrong people for many years. And when you are connecting with people who say they would provide that sense of home, but it is conditional, and also recognizing that home isn't in another person, it's not in a relationship. You need to feel at home in yourself. That was key, because after I had had a few of the same kinds of experiences, not like exactly the same, but the same ballpark, the same family, the same energy, that kind of thing. And I'm, of course, the constant factor in all of the variables. Well, you have to take a look at yourself, don't you? You can't be like, oh, why do I keep attracting the same people? Why does the same thing keep happening to me? It's because you're not learning the lesson. You're not taking accountability. You're not reaching in and doing the work and engaging with your self-development and self-growth, let alone not even knowing yourself. Because if you took effort to know yourself, then you start to turn the corner, So there was a few different things there that, when you're chasing home as a feeling, it can lead you down the wrong avenue. But then when you start to clock the patterns and cycles, you can free yourself from them. But what was really important about having home as a feeling is that has always led me to live in different places and move through different groups and communities, and seeing these touch points, and again, building up that concept of the tapestry of humanity, everything and everyone belonging and coming together and playing to our strengths, and not being like the airbrush love and light nonsense merchants that I have known over the years, and recognizing that we have got a lot of work to do to get there, to a point where the majority of us can start to embrace this thinking through the lens of our own perspectives, not seeing our sense of home as under threat by the other or the different. The only ones who are threatened by the diversification of humanity are the cultural supremacists, those who believe that their particular culture deserves to stand on the necks of others so it may be seen. This is domination and oppression, and this is not energy that belongs in the modern world. But hey ho, here we are, we're still dealing with it. So one of the purposes of sharing this stuff today is to help us think about, what constitutes home to us if we're taking it outside of that idea of like, home is my house on this street, this is the number, in there lives my family. No, 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 no. We get all that, but let's take it deeper. What does it feel like? What are the sensations? What are the motivations? What do you want to bring to the table in your home? What do you want to create as your home? It's these kind of deeper, more probing questions that get us to a more broad perspective of what home can mean and can be. Those of you watching the video will see I keep looking down. It's because I've got all of my points for the show today. The next one that I've written down is home is a collective of people, not just blood relations, and community is family. Now, this is quite common among people who have essentially been like scapegoated or are considered the black sheep, is that they build those relationships and connections with others who sometimes are of a similar mind and experience, but often it's just people who are accepting and open and welcoming. And, at the age of 40, I've got a much better relationship with my family now than I did 20 years ago or 15 years ago. But still, there are things that need to be resolved. However, in that time, some of the people that I've met along the way have become as close to me as if we were cut from the same literal genetic cloth as each other. So this is really important because those senses of connection with other people and that sense of affinity with other people was a lot of hope, was a lot of support in difficult times. And something that I'm very concerned about is the rise of cult-like groups and how cults are built around, very charismatic figures, which can be all different types of folks with our means and modes of communication now. But it's like the shadow inversion of that kind of relationship, because a cult is not a community, a clique is not a community. Anyone where someone is stood on your neck to rise above you is not a community. But a lot are presented in such a way because we're so disconnected, because we don't know what home feels like anymore. And when we start to draw these distinctions, and we start to kind of think along these ways, we can see that, home is not necessarily under threat. The only folks who are threatening your home are the ones who are in the suit on the television telling you which way the wind blows and who we're supposed to be angry at to distract you from the real systemic and structural injustices in this world. They're the ones who are essentially threatening all of us because their vested interest is in power and control. It is not in the interest of the common human. So when we start to connect with home as that sense of feeling within ourselves, we can then recognize that actually, do you know what? Maybe the person who does look different to me has actually got a lot more common with me than the person who claims to represent me on the television or in the newspaper or on social media, this kind of stuff. It's a very powerful and simple shift to engage with, and one that takes time to bed in. The next one is home is me giving permission to be myself. So with these various different points of identity and isolation and alienation that I explained earlier in the episode, I felt a lot of the time that, to fit in, I had to turn down my self-expression, turn down my light. Now, and that's not good for anyone. That's very difficult because when you're doing that, you're restricting yourself. And when you're restricting yourself, you can't fully shine and do your own thing. Now, as someone who has a background in music, particularly electric guitar, one of my idols early in my journey, was Jimi Hendrix. And there was something about his music that just spoke to me because it seemed to be coming from another place. He was one of the first people that made me think that music was an expression of something that exists outside of humanity. just because when you listen to the contemporaries of Hendrix and what they were creating and expressing, and then he comes along, there's worlds apart. And I can't remember if this was in a book or a magazine, but it said that, it likened Hendrix as a musician to the ugly duckling that was reincarnated as the psychedelic swan. And that really stuck with me. That was one of those things that it was almost like it was tattooed onto my brain, and that gave me a sense of permission to keep evolving and keep growing and keep connecting with that sense of personal expression. Because for me, looking through the lens into the world and seeing what's what through that perspective is really important, because that's how I'm supposed to see it. That doesn't make it definitive. That just means this is your perspective, work from your perspective. And as a Libra, it's all about balance, collaboration, and harmony. So the perspectives are not sacred. They are not the truth, lest those ones who are blue-pilled so hard would like us to believe. Why am I using the terminology of the blue pill today? I don't know. Maybe it's because folks that claim to have taken the red pill are just frantically scribbling red ink on those blue pills of theirs. And hypocrisy is one of the things that annoys me the most, because if they weren't so dangerous, then it would be funny. But anyway, we have to focus on elevating the consciousness and awareness before we can just return to joking about the absurdities of this world, lest they try and take it over. So recognizing that perspectives are not sacred and also not the truth was really helpful, because that then freed me to do life my way on my terms. So going off and doing my own thing was actually okay. And it stopped me being hung up on being not accepted or disliked by people that ultimately I couldn't really care about, and none of them are in my life now anyway. So that sense of permission to be the self is a real key one. And you hear people saying, you don't need permission to be yourself. Well, for a lot of us, we do. Because for a lot of us, that was our experience. And until we heal that wound from the inside out, we're still going to need to remind ourselves, hey, man, it's okay. Say the thing, do the thing, express yourself. It's okay. Because this stuff is very real. And when we start to give ourselves this permission to feel at home in ourselves and to express ourselves, we unplug ourselves from a very specific layer of the game. And the game that we're all party to, the game of humanity, currently we're under constant bombardment by things that are supposed to make us feel, and things that make us feel outrage, things that make us feel frustration, things that drive us to act through the emotionally manipulative window of primal emotional states. Anger, for example, if you were wondering, this is obviously the first one I would point to. And when we have that sense of home and that feeling of home within us, we can recognize what's going on, because it's not about ignoring the injustices of the world. It's about recognizing why they're being perpetrated and what we can do about them to make them stop. And that's going to be different for everyone. Everyone's going to express that in a different way. But as you give yourself permission to be yourself, you're going to see, that's my place in the conversation. That's my spot in the line. This is how we can approach and show up. Because again, different perspectives are important. It's all part of the wave of change, man. And that's the key, because you don't need to look very far these days to have someone telling you you're doing something wrong, or they've got the secret to, sorting your life out, or they know what all the problems are with the world. Whereas so many times people just want you to engage with them because they make money from engagement. There's money to be made in rage. There's money to be made in anger. And when people talk about, oh yeah, the dark magic of the world, the elites, all this kind of bullshit, what they don't recognize is they're buying into it hook, line, and sinker by having this sense of a righteous indignation, but at all of the wrong shit. because they don't feel at home in themselves, because they have then got that feeling of like, oh no, my home's been taken away. Oh no, all of this stuff's been taken away from me. But if you have the feeling can't be taken away. You know, it's that fucking simple. My God, it bends my brain that we've become so rooted in the physical and the literal that we've lost the ability en masse, or should we say forgotten, or maybe conveniently ignoring, that we are energetic beings. We are sensitive to the energy of situations. Emotions are how we experience energy. So if we have that feeling of home and someone's trying to put outrage onto us, it's like, hey, not in my house, man. We recognize that, but I actually see you're the one causing the problem rather than pointing the finger at these folks. There's three fingers pointing back at you. I think where the three fingers are pointing is where we should be looking, you know? So it's these kind of things that help us put ourselves back in touch with our humanity, because the sense of humanity is fast draining out of the world if social media is to be believed. So once we identify that, we can then identify our sense of zones of influence. Where can you operate in your life that is positive, productive, powerful, and affects change? Reminds me of the great phrase, think global and act local. And this is where we start to get into a sense of hope, because home is the foundation or the soil that the seeds of hope can be planted in. And if home is in your energy and within your sense of self and your perspective and moving in that rhythm, suddenly we get to see that we have power. We get to see that we have agency, ability, and autonomy to start creating change in the world around us. So it's that zooming things right the way in, and not thinking that you have to have an opinion on absolutely everything that goes on, or you've got to stay up with everything that's going on in the news. Stand up against injustice where you feel you can, and recognize that even the smallest actions can lead to the biggest differences. Because if we're suddenly all flipping the switch and focusing more on this sense of energy as home as a vibe, then we recognize that there is more that connects us. Once again, another connection point. So when we have those zones of influence and zones of awareness, we're looking at like our lives offline and also some of our lives online as well. Because when you spend like more than a day or so offline, or at least not super plugged in, world doesn't seem to look that bad. Because what's happening at the moment with the injustices and oppression and all of the wrong things is they are coming to light. This is the old way, refusing to go into the night. And it is amplifying itself. It's trying to clamp down. It's creating more atrocity, more suffering, more pain. Doesn't mean we ignore it. There are many different things that we can do to affect that change, but it all starts with that sense of home within us, because then that allows you to lean into your perspective, and then you can see the rhythm of life and how things are moving, and then you know where to position yourself to take that step to be part of something that is creating a better world. Because when we're not free from this, and we get turned into the emotional hand puppet, people can make us do and say the most crazy things, and we take it on as our own. A lot of people's perspectives, a lot of people's opinions are not their own. A lot of people's beliefs are not their own. A lot of the way that people see the world has got nothing to do with them as a person. They just align themselves with the loudest voice in the room because that's what humans have always done. Well, let's think about some evolution here. Let's think about going down a different path. Let's think about how we can start to affect that change within ourselves to then reverberate out into the world like energetic ripples. And it all starts with that sense of home, because there will be people who are committed to misunderstanding others. There are people who see the worst in others. There are people who are jealous of others because they don't know how to positively assert themselves to move ahead, and they deal with things through the more primal emotion, whether that's turned on to others or turned on to themselves. And we're looking at nuanced stuff here today because we live in unnuanced times. And when it comes to oppression and injustice, there is no nuance. It is bad. And we have to figure out ways to address that. But again, that starts with coming from that sense of home within. When we're looking at the solutions to the other stuff in the world, nuance is key because we've got different perspectives and different things are affecting different people in different ways. So we draw together to find bigger solutions. And this is important to me because we have to recognize that so many people are still plugged into that illusion. They're claiming to have woken up, but they've just gone deeper into the dream, like that film Inception, where there are layers within layers of the dream, claiming everyone else is a sheep and they've woken up, but they're actually just 2 layers down in the dream. And it's going to be a long way for them to go to get that sense of perspective, because all of that stuff is coming through the emotionally manipulative window of fear, anger, guilt, hatred, suffering, all of these things, the primal emotions, once again. So when we have people operating from that place, or that's informing their perspective, it's not really people that we should take seriously, in my personal point of view, because they're out to ruin everyone's day, because they have essentially chosen a world that is hell already, and hell of their own making as well, rather than people that are literally trying to survive in what we could be described as hell in terms of oppression, militarized aggression, war zones, domination, all of this kind of thing. I'm sort of like tiptoeing around certain things here purely for purposes of the algorithm, so message can get out further, but let those with ears hear and those with eyes see, is all I'm going to say there. So within all of this, when we have that sense of home within ourselves and connecting with that sense of hope, it allows us to truly hear other people, truly see other people, truly connect with what they're saying, and have that sense of understanding that we can then meet in the middle and combine perspectives to create more integrative solutions in this world. And for those who are committed to misunderstanding you, or make arguments in bad faith, or are fans of the straw man, that, shall we say, some of the smooth-brained regressive podcasters, having a sense of home within yourself doesn't get you sucked into the nonsense, doesn't get you sucked into these people's agendas and them trying to have domination over you, or them acting as mouthpieces and sock puppets for those who wish to dominate others. Now, in terms of hope, people ask me, like, how on earth have you got through all of the things you've got through in life and you still can be silly and laugh and joke and find joy? And my answer is I had no other choice, because I did go the other way. It did get to situations where I did want to actively remove myself from the planet because it was just too much. But when you've looked that in the eye and you've come out the other side of things, you start to see the absurdity in this life and in this world. And so many things don't matter, truly. So many things don't matter because it's about vested interest rather than ethics. What is right, what is wrong. So many things don't matter because they're just not relevant to you. And it's not natural for us to have a position on absolutely everything. So then you start to see the separation, then you start to see where you can positively affect change. There is a lot more to be said to having a meaningful conversation with someone over a dinner table than posting something on the internet just so you can be visibly seen to be doing something. This, again, is something that I have learned in my experience as a mixed race human being, because there are a lot of people from different backgrounds that just can't express themselves in the same way. And they are then told that their form of standing up for what is right in this world is somehow not valid because it's not visible. Well, that tends to come from people who are in a position where maybe the structural injustices and systemic problems are actually weighted in their favor. So in terms of doing something visible, they might not necessarily feel the full weight of the mechanism upon them. So again, Let those with ears hear and those with eyes see. Because when you have that sense of home in yourself and you've planted the seeds of hope and you're working from your perspective, you'll see how you can be part of the change. Because this is all one big chain that we can be links within, and we can move things forward from that perspective of openness and a home within the self. This is so important because otherwise, when we don't have that, it makes us vulnerable. It makes us vulnerable to negative influence, and it makes us vulnerable to the influence of those with a vested interest or agenda, which we don't want. So part of how I find hope in a day-to-day basis is music. I'm always listening to stuff. I've always like making new playlists, and for years, obviously, like going out and playing, and had a bit of time off, but we're getting back into that now. So there's that sense of creativity and movement, and again, like I say, for me, music is the expression of the divine, the transcendental, the things that connect us as humans. So when I listen to music, I feel connected to others. It's that kind of thing. And then again, as someone who plays and DJs, when you hear stuff that's like, oh, that's great, building playlists, set lists, all this kind of stuff. It's like, for me, it's about connecting others. So that's really important as well. But it's also recognizing the magic of the world that we live in. Go for it, as someone who's self-employed, works from home, I make sure to try and get out every day, because if I don't get out, I go a little bit crazy. And no one likes that. But when you have that moment, you go out in nature for a couple of hours, you see some insects, animals, plants, the sky, the hum of the earth. That's magical. That's beautiful. One of the problems that we've got now is people are so driven to fit in, be accepted, and be loved, that they've denied the whimsy of this world. They've denied their ability to connect with that sense of childlike wonder and play. There is no stronger human being on this world than those who are connected with whimsy and are able to adopt a position of innocence within the context of their experiences. And that phrase, innocence within the context of experience, is something that came from Robert Fripp, the guitarist and I would say main man of King Crimson. But if he ever heard this, he'd probably be like, what are you on about? Not that he ever will. But it's that thing of approaching something with an openness without the weight of your experiences, but the wisdom of your experiences, and the path that you've walked informs how you may approach something, but you still approach it with openness. And that sense of home within ourselves, I think, is a key and crucial component to that. Because when we start to do that and we start to see the magic in the world, we start to find joy, we start to find that ability to dance, to laugh, to joke, to all of these different things with everything else going on, you are free. That is the big rebellion. That is the big screw you. That is the red pill. If anything ever was. It's not as ridiculous as some people like to make out, because that whole scene is just the biggest ego crutch I've ever seen in my life. If you actually want to unplug from the matrix, man, find some fucking joy. Find something that makes you laugh. Find something that makes you feel like a child again, and you realize that essence of freedom within us. Yeah, the state might be transient, but just because it's going to go doesn't mean it won't come back. And again, if the sense of home within us is the foundation or the soil that we plant the seeds of hope, joy, whimsy, self-expression, these kind of things, that's the plant food. That's the plant food. That's the sunlight. That's tending to the garden so these seeds can grow into strong things. And also, if we don't do that, if we don't have that sense of play, it's very easy for things like anxiety to clamp down. For many years, I lived with like chronic anxiety on so many different things. Still comes back, still have to deal with it, but that sense of joy and playfulness and curiosity, those were the big things that really helped me through. So it's not just about like, yeah, you gotta find home in yourself and no. This is about something much deeper, that when you shift your internal energy system to that sense of home as a vibration. Yes, of course, it can be all of the things that home traditionally is. And if you have that, I am legitimately and genuinely so happy for you. But what I am saying is, let's add in another layer now. Let's bring some of that wisdom from outside of the circle and from outside of convention and outside what is considered traditionally home to the table. And let's look at it, let's explore it, and recognize that when we have that sense of home within us, we are free. And when we are free, we can create. When we can create, there is hope. When we identify the zones of influence in our life, there is more hope because we see how we can be effective. Everyone is connected. Remember, you start operating in those zones of influence as a resonator. That's going to move outwardly. That's going to connect with other people. That's going to resonate with them. Some it might not, but screw them. It doesn't matter. The more of us that start resonating and operating as resonators in this lattice of consciousness that is humanity, the more things can move forward, because again, it's like decentralized, it's about personal autonomy, the interdependence of community. All of it starts with this energy and that vibration. And remember, my friends, that when we start to connect with these joys in our daily life, those are the keys to freedom. All you got to do is put the key in the damn door and turn it. And then it's up to you if you want to walk through it or not, because what's on the other side is different for all of us. But I will say this, what is on the other side was very interesting indeed. So I will leave you with this little quote, because like they say, remember, it'll be all right in the end. And if it's not all right, it's not the end. So there we go. My name is Alistair Ballantyne. You have been listening to The Big Soup. If you want my help and assistance and support on your journey, please feel free to visit my website, alistairballantyne.com, where you can see the range of services, support, and events that I offer for those who are the spiritually and energetically curious, who want to live a more aligned life through the perspective and lens of their own personal, spiritually informed path. As ever, it has been a pleasure to connect with you. Thank you for tuning into The Big Soup this week. I will see you next time. And remember, stay curious, stay soupy.